Late at night, when everyone had gone home, Maria pushed her cleaning cart down the empty university hallway. The sound of her mop echoed softly on the shiny marble floor. Outside, the wind whispered through the old windows, and the big clock above the concert hall struck 11. Maria sighed, her back aching from hours of cleaning classrooms and restrooms. She had worked at the university for 10 years, and no one ever really noticed her to the students. She was just the janitor lady, the one who picked up trash and kept the place spotless. Every night when her shift was almost over, Maria would stop in front of the grand concert hall. Through the small glass window in the door, she could see the large black piano sitting on the stage under a single golden light. It was beautiful, almost magical, the kind of piano only rich students could touch. She stood there quietly, her hand resting on the doorknob. She knew she wasn't allowed to go inside, but every time she looked at that piano, her heart ached a little more. Maria had once been more than a janitor. When she was young, she was a piano prodigy. Her fingers had danced on the keys like they were made for her. Her music teacher used to say, "One day the world will know your name, Maria." But that was before the accident, before she lost her mother and her home, before life took everything and left her with only memories and grief. When the world became too heavy, Maria stopped playing. The piano, her only joy, reminded her too much of what she had lost years later. She took this job as a janitor to survive. She never told anyone about her past, not even her co-workers, to them. She was just quiet Maria, polite and hardworking, always humming while she cleaned. But sometimes, when no one was around, she would unlock the concert hall and step inside. The air smelled of polished wood and old music. The big room was dark except for the light that always stayed above the piano. Maria would walk slowly toward it, her heart beating fast. She would run her fingers across the smooth lid, feeling the cold surface under her hands. Then she'd whisper softly, "It's been a long time." My friend, she never dared to play it. She only wiped off the dust, arranged the piano bench neatly, and looked at the keys with longing. The students didn't know, but Maria remembered every scale, every melody, every touch of the piano. Her hands sometimes trembled, not from age, but from the music that still lived inside her, waiting to be heard again. One night, as she finished cleaning the hallways, she noticed a young student sitting outside the concert hall. He was staring at his phone, frustrated. "You okay, son?" she asked kindly. The boy sighed. "Nah, my recital piece is too hard. I keep messing up." "I wish I could play like the old masters," Maria smiled gently. "Maybe you just need to feel the music, not fight it." The boy laughed lightly. "Thanks, but what would you know about it, ma'am?" Maria smiled again, but said nothing. She went inside after he left and quietly began mopping the concert hall floor. The piano stood there silent and proud. She looked at it for a long moment, remembering her mother's voice saying, "When you play, play with your heart, not your hands." For a moment she sat down on the bench. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling. She whispered, "Just one note," and pressed a single key. The sound filled the room, soft, clear, and warm. It made her eyes fill with tears. She played another note and another. Soon, a melody she hadn't touched in years began to flow like water. Maria didn't notice that a small red light on the wall camera blinked on. Recording her, she was lost in the music. Each note carried her memories, her mother's laughter, her childhood dreams, the nights when she believed she could change the world. When she stopped, the room was silent again. She wiped her tears and whispered, "Good night," to the piano before leaving. She didn't know that this quiet moment, this private piece of her heart, would soon travel across the world and change her life forever. That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, Maria felt lighter. For the first time in years, she had played again, and though no one had heard her, it didn't matter. Her soul had, and that was enough. But fate had already pressed record, and her melody was about to echo far beyond those empty walls. The next morning, the university buzzed with excitement. A new president had taken charge, Dr. Lewis, a man known for his sharp suits, louder words, and even sharper pride. He walked through the halls with his chest out and his chin high. His shoes clicked on the floor like a drumbeat of authority. The professors hurried to greet him. The students whispered about him. And the staff, especially the janitors, kept their distance. Dr. Lewis believed in appearances. He thought a university was only as good as how expensive it looked. To him, image was everything. He wanted the place to shine, not for its soul or students, but for how it impressed the donors. When he passed Maria in the hallway that morning, he barely glanced at her. Just enough to notice her old uniform and tired hands. He nodded once without a smile and kept walking. For him, janitors were invisible. Maria didn't mind, she was used to being unseen. She pushed her cleaning cart quietly as students and professors passed her without eye contact. But that afternoon, she had to clean the main auditorium, the same grand hall where the piano stood. A special welcome ceremony for the new president was about to take place. Banners hung from the balcony, lights shone bright, and the smell of flowers filled the air. Maria swept the stage carefully while the students practiced speeches. Her eyes kept wandering to the piano in the corner, gleaming under the light. It seemed to call her name like it always did. But she shook her head softly and continued cleaning. Her job was to make sure the hall sparkled before everyone arrived, not to dream. Soon the crowd poured in. Professors, reporters, and students filled the seats. Dr. Lewis walked onto the stage wearing his best smile. He gave a grand speech about excellence, discipline, and success. At this university, he said, we aim to produce only the best, not just in academics, but in character and culture. In status, he paused dramatically, scanning the crowd. His eyes stopped briefly on Maria, who stood near the side curtain holding her mop. He looked away quickly, as if her presence didn't belong in his perfect scene after the ceremony. A few music students were preparing to perform to celebrate the event. One of them, a confident boy named Ethan, was showing off near the piano. Watch this. I'll impress the president, he said proudly. His friends laughed and cheered him on. Maria stayed nearby, quietly collecting cups and napkins. Ethan struck a few wrong notes and groaned, "Ugh, this piece is impossible." He looked up and noticed Maria glancing toward the piano. "You think you can do better, ma'am?" He teased with a grin. His friends laughed. Dr. Lewis turned slightly to see what the noise was about. Maria smiled politely and shook her head. "No, young man. I was just listening," she said softly. But Ethan wouldn't stop. "Come on, let's see if you can play anything at all," he joked. Everyone nearby laughed, amused at the idea of a janitor touching a grand piano. Dr. Lewis chuckled too, his voice echoing across the room. "If a janitor ever plays that piano," he said loudly, "I'll resign on the spot." The students roared with laughter. Even Ethan clapped at the joke. Maria's face flushed red. She lowered her head and whispered, "I'm sorry." "Sir?" Before walking away with her mop, the laughter followed her out of the hall like a shadow. Her chest ached, not from embarrassment, but from a sadness she thought she had buried long ago. She had spent years cleaning that stage, listening to others play the instrument she once loved, and now, the same world that once clapped for her music, mocked her for even looking at it. Later that night, the hall was silent again. The laughter had faded, but the words stayed. "If a janitor plays that piano, I'll resign." Maria stood outside the door. Staring through the glass, the piano sat under the golden light again, untouched, perfect, waiting. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Her shoes made no sound on the carpet. She placed her cleaning tools aside and walked up to the piano. Slowly, she ran her hand over the polished wood. The surface was warm under her touch, as if it remembered her. Her heart pounded, her hands trembled. "I'm still me," she whispered to herself. "They just forgot." She sat on the bench and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her fingers found their place on the keys, but she didn't play, not yet. She looked around the empty hall, the same hall where she was mocked hours ago, and smiled sadly. "One day," she murmured, "they'll remember what music really sounds like." She stood up, turned off the lights, and left the hall. But somewhere deep inside, something had awakened, a spark she had buried for years. And though the president's cruel laughter still echoed in her mind, Maria knew something had changed that night. She walked home through the cold streets, her fingers twitching as if they still wanted to play. She didn't know it yet, but destiny had already started to move. The next time she touched that piano, the whole world would listen, and the man who laughed would never forget her name. That night, the university was silent again. The moonlight slipped through the tall glass windows, and the empty corridors glowed faintly like ghosts were walking through them. Maria finished her last cleaning round, but her mind wasn't at peace every time she closed her eyes. She heard their laughter, the students chuckling, the president's mocking voice echoing in her ears. If a janitor plays that piano, I'll resign." She stood by the door of the concert hall again, holding her mop like a shield. The piano sat under a soft golden light. Just like always waiting, the hall looked peaceful. But inside her a storm was building. Her hands shook not from fear, but from something stronger, longing. Anger, pride, and love all mixing together, Maria whispered to herself. He laughed like music belonged only to his kind. Her eyes glistened. But music never cared who played it. Slowly she pushed the door open. The hinges creaked softly, echoing across the hall. She left her cart outside and stepped in barefoot to not make noise. The air was cool and smelled faintly of polish and old wood. She walked up to the piano and touched it gently. Her fingertips brushed the lid like she was greeting an old friend after years apart. "You remember me, don't you?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were calm. She lifted the lid, revealing the black and white keys gleaming under the dim light. They looked untouched, pure. Waiting for someone worthy, Maria smiled sadly. "They think I'm not," she said softly. "Let's prove them wrong." She sat down on the piano bench, her knees weak. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy surface of the instrument. For a moment she just sat there, breathing deeply, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Then with trembling fingers she pressed a single key. The sound was soft, fragile, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. She waited, listening to the note fade into silence. Then she pressed another, and another. The melody began to form, small and shy at first, like a bird learning to fly, but as she played, something inside her unlocked. The stiffness in her hands melted away, her shoulders relaxed. The music began to grow richer, bolder. Her fingers danced across the keys, faster, freer, the sound filling the empty hall with emotion that words could never describe. The melody she played was one she had written long ago, her mother's song. It was a lullaby she used to perform before competitions. Her mother would stand backstage, smiling, whispering, "Play with your heart, not your hands." Maria's lips curved upward at the memory, tears rolling silently down her cheeks as she played the notes. Her emotions poured out like a storm. Grief, love, loss, hope. The room seemed to come alive with her music. The sound echoed against the marble walls, wrapping around her like a warm embrace for the first time in years. Maria wasn't a janitor, she wasn't invisible. She was Maria, the pianist who once made crowds weep. Unbeknownst to her, in the corner of the hall, a small red light blinked. The security camera mounted near the ceiling recorded every moment. The melody, the tears, the fire in her expression. It all became part of a silent witness. She played for what felt like hours, moving from gentle whispers to roaring crescendos. It was raw, honest, and breathtaking. The kind of music that doesn't just reach ears, it reaches souls. When she finally played the last note, it lingered in the air, fading like a dream, slowly letting go. Maria sat still, her hands resting on the keys, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She whispered softly, "I'm still here." "Mama," her voice cracked. "They forgot, but I didn't." Then carefully she stood up and closed the piano. She placed a hand on its polished lid and said quietly, "Thank you." She turned off the lights and left, not knowing her midnight performance had already escaped into the world. The next morning, the young security intern named Adam came in early to check the recordings. He was reviewing the tapes when he noticed something unusual, movement in the concert hall at 2:13 a.m. He clicked play, expecting to see maybe a student sneaking in. Instead, he saw Maria, the janitor, sitting at the piano. He leaned closer, his eyes widening as the music began. Even through the low-quality security audio, he could feel the emotion, the soft beginning, the slow rise, the heartbreaking finish. It was unlike anything he had ever heard. By the time the video ended, Adam's eyes were wet. He whispered, "No one's going to believe this." He hesitated for a moment, then downloaded the clip and uploaded it anonymously. The caption read, "The janitor who made me cry at 2 a.m. He pressed post, not realizing that he had just released something that would reach millions, something that would change Maria's life forever. And somewhere across campus, Maria continued her shift like every other day, still unseen, still quiet, unaware that her forgotten melody was already making the world stop and listen. The next morning started like any other for Maria. The smell of floor polish filled the air as she pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways. Humming softly to herself, students passed her by laughing. scrolling through their phones and sipping coffee. She didn't know that half of them were watching her without realizing it. By the time Maria reached the auditorium, whispers were already spreading across the university. "Did you see that video?" One girl asked her friend, "The janitor playing piano?" The boy laughed. "That can't be real, right?" "She works here. She cleans classrooms." Another whispered, "No, listen to it again. That's real talent." In one corner of campus, a group of music students huddled around a phone. The screen showed a grainy recording, Maria sitting at the piano, her face calm, her hands flying over the keys. The title read, "The Janitor Who Made Me Cry at 2 a.m. The sound quality was rough, but the emotion cut through perfectly. It didn't need studio magic. It was pure, raw, human. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had thousands of shares, comments flooded in. "Who is she? That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You can feel her soul in every note." Students who used to walk past Maria without a glance now stared at her in the halls. Some smiled kindly, some looked guilty, and others just whispered behind her back. Maria didn't understand what was happening, not yet. She only noticed people looking at her differently. That afternoon, while she was cleaning the music building, she overheard two professors talking excitedly. "It's unbelievable," said one, "the emotion in her playing. I haven't heard anything like it in years." The other nodded. "We've been teaching technique, not passion." She reminded everyone what real music feels like. Maria froze mid-step, gripping her mop. "Could they be talking about me?" she whispered. Her heart raced, but she quickly pushed the thought away. It couldn't be. No one cared about janitors, right? Meanwhile, in the president's office, Dr. Lewis sat behind his massive desk. His assistant entered with a nervous look. "Sir, have you seen the video going around?" she asked. Dr. Lewis frowned. "What video?" She turned her tablet toward him and pressed play. For the next 2 minutes, the only sound in the room was the piano. Dr. Lewis leaned forward, his eyebrows furrowing. The melody hit him like a wave, deep, emotional, and haunting. When it ended, he sat back, silent. "Who is this?" he asked finally. The assistant hesitated. "Sir, that's our janitor, Maria Alvarez." Dr. Lewis blinked, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "Impossible," he said. "That's not a janitor. That's a concert pianist." The assistant nodded quietly. Apparently, she used to be. By noon, the video had gone viral beyond the campus. Music blogs, online magazines, and even local TV channels had picked it up. "Mysterious janitor's piano performance brings millions to tears," one headline said. Another wrote, "University janitor's hidden talent leaves viewers speechless." Maria didn't know about any of this. She spent her lunch break sitting alone behind the building, eating a small sandwich, watching the pigeons peck at crumbs. She liked her quiet moments. But her peace didn't last long. "Maria," called a familiar voice. It was Ethan, the student who had mocked her during the ceremony. He looked pale, awkward. I just wanted to say that video, it was you, right?" Maria blinked. "What video?" she asked. He pulled out his phone and showed her. Her hands trembled as she watched herself play. She covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Who recorded this?" she whispered. Ethan scratched his head. "Doesn't matter, the world's already seen it." He smiled nervously. "You're amazing, ma'am. I'm sorry for how I acted." Maria couldn't speak. She just stared at the screen, her mind spinning that evening. She returned home to find reporters waiting outside her small apartment building. Microphones, cameras, flashing lights, and all for her, Miss Alvarez. One shouted, "How does it feel to inspire millions?" Another asked, "Did you really work here for 10 years without anyone knowing your past?" Maria's head spun. She managed to whisper, "Please, I just played one song," before slipping inside her door and locking it behind her. She sat on her bed, her heart pounding. She didn't understand why the world suddenly cared. She had played for herself, for her mother, not for fame, but far away in the grand office upstairs. Dr. Lewis paced the floor. The media had already connected the story to his university, and worse, someone had replayed his quote in the comments. "If a janitor ever plays that piano, I'll resign." It was everywhere now, repeated and mocked. For the first time since taking office, Dr. Lewis didn't know what to do. He stared out the window at the campus below, at the students watching the video under the trees, and whispered, "What have I done?" And in that same moment across the city, Maria sat quietly by her window, staring at the moon. She had no idea her life was about to change completely. The world had found her again, and this time, it wasn't going to forget. By the next morning, Maria's name was everywhere. Her phone buzzed nonstop, reporters left messages, and strangers sent letters to the university asking about the mysterious pianist Janitor. She tried to ignore it all, keeping her head down and continuing her shift. But every hallway she cleaned whispered her name. Students smiled when she passed. Professors nodded respectfully. Some even stopped to say, "Your music touched my heart." Maria only smiled politely and replied, "Thank you, but I was just cleaning that night." Yet deep down, she knew something had shifted forever that afternoon. While sweeping near the music department, a tall man in a gray suit approached her. He was one of the senior professors, Professor Daniels, head of the piano division. "Maria," he said kindly, "may I have a word?" She hesitated, nervous. "Of course, sir." He motioned for her to follow him into his office. The room smelled of old paper, coffee, and memories. On the wall hung photos of famous pianists. And now, a printed screenshot of her playing from the viral video. Professor Daniels sat down, smiling warmly. "You've given this university something rare," he said. Maria frowned shyly. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause trouble," he shook his head. "Trouble?" You reminded us what music really is. He leaned forward. "Maria, how long have you been here?" 10 years, she replied softly. "Mostly cleaning, sometimes helping in the recital hall." "And before that?" he asked gently. Maria hesitated, then whispered, "Before that, I was supposed to study in a conservatory. I played concerts as a teenager, but after my mother died, I couldn't afford school. I left everything behind." Professor Daniels sighed. "Life can be cruel." Then his tone brightened. "But sometimes, it gives us a second stage." He opened a folder and slid a paper across the desk. "The university's hosting the annual music gala next week. I want you to perform." Maria's eyes widened. "Perform? Me?" she stammered. "Sir, I haven't been on stage in years. I'm just a janitor." Daniels smiled. "No, Maria. You are a musician who happens to clean, not the other way around." She sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "But the president," she began. "The president doesn't run the music of this university." Daniels interrupted softly. "You do now." That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment staring at the invitation in her hands. Her fingers shook. She could still hear Dr. Lewis's mocking words echoing in her head. "If a janitor plays that piano, I'll resign," she whispered to herself. "What if I fail? What if they laugh again?" But then she remembered her mother's voice, gentle, warm. "You play with your heart, not your hands." The next day, she walked back into the hall she had always cleaned, but this time she carried no mop, no gloves, just a worn-out sheet of music she had written years ago. The students stopped to watch her, whispers following her every step. "Is she really performing?" one asked the janitor. Professor Daniels waited by the piano, smiling. "Ready?" he asked. Maria exhaled slowly. "As I'll ever be." She sat down and pressed a few keys. Rusty, uneven but familiar. The sound filled the air. She practiced for hours after her shift each day, playing until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred with tears. Some nights she played softly to the empty room. Other nights she poured every emotion she had buried for years into the melody. Unseen by her, some of the same students who once laughed stayed to listen from the doorway. They whispered to each other, "She's better than all of us." Meanwhile, the news reached Dr. Lewis. He called an emergency meeting with his staff. Pacing the floor, "She can't perform," he snapped. "She's staff, not faculty." But his assistant replied carefully, "Sir, the board already approved it, and the whole campus supports her. Pulling her now would look terrible." For a moment, his face flushed red with anger. Then he sat down and muttered, "Fine, let her play, but when she fails, this nonsense ends." Days passed quickly, and the night of the gala arrived. The auditorium was full. Professors, donors, media, students, even people from the city, all waiting to see if the janitor's magic was real or just internet sympathy. Maria waited backstage, wearing a simple black dress borrowed from a professor's wife. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself, not because of the dress, but because of the courage in her eyes. Professor Daniels walked in and smiled softly. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" she asked. He grinned. A musician who plays with her soul, as the announcer called her name. Maria closed her eyes, whispered a short prayer, and stepped onto the stage. The lights hit her face and the crowd fell silent. Somewhere in the front row sat Dr. Lewis, his arms crossed, waiting to see her stumble. Maria sat down at the piano, her heart beating fast. She touched the keys, cold, smooth, familiar. Then she took a deep breath and began to play. The first note rang out, pure and trembling, and every ear in the room turned toward her. The melody grew, deep, emotional, full of pain and beauty. Each note carried her story. Each sound told the world who she really was. And for the first time, everyone listened, truly listened, not to a janitor, but to an artist who had been silent for far too long. The lights dimmed, and the soft hum of the crowd faded into complete silence. Maria sat at the piano, the spotlight warm on her face, her heart thundering in her chest. The world felt still, as if it was holding its breath just for her. She pressed the first key, a single trembling note that echoed through the massive hall. It was small, fragile, but honest. Then another and another. The sound spread like ripples in water, gentle yet alive. Each note carried a piece of her heart, her memories, her pain. At first, people just listened politely, but as the music began to grow, something changed. The melody turned haunting, then powerful. Maria's fingers flew across the keys with grace and emotion no one had seen before. It was as if she wasn't playing a song, she was telling a story without words. Students leaned forward, forgetting to blink. Professors froze mid-sip. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. The janitor they had walked past for years was now commanding the stage. Every sound from that piano demanded their heart's attention. Maria's music painted pictures in their minds. A little girl laughing beside her mother. A young pianist dreaming of the stage. A woman standing alone in an empty hall, too afraid to play again. It was her life told through melody. Each note and emotion she had once buried. As she played, her eyes filled with tears. But she didn't stop. The sorrow and beauty mixed perfectly. Some notes trembled with grief, others soared with hope. The audience could feel every moment of her struggle, every bruise life had given her, every joy it had once promised. And then the song reached its heart. The room seemed to breathe with her. The music slowed softer, like a whisper. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's voice saying, "Play with your heart, not your hands." A tear rolled down her cheek, but her fingers never faltered. The melody lifted again, a brighter, braver, a promise reborn. She poured her soul into every note, letting go of every humiliation, every cruel laugh. Every night she cried alone while others played under bright lights. Dr. Lewis sat in the front row, frozen. His smug smile had vanished. His hands gripped the armrest tightly for the first time. He wasn't the most powerful man in the room. The music humbled him, tore through his pride, and left him silent. His mind whispered his own words, the same ones the world had repeated endlessly online. "If a janitor plays the piano, I'll resign." He felt his throat tighten. His arrogance shrank in the face of her truth. He realized this wasn't just talent, it was greatness, pure and undeniable. When Maria reached the final passage, her body leaned into the piano, her entire being focused on the sound. The melody rose like a prayer. The air vibrated with emotion so deep that it felt holy. People began to cry quietly in their seats. Some clasped their hands together. Others just stared, afraid to blink and miss a second. And then, the last note came, long and lingering. It hung in the air, floating like a memory that refused to die. Then, in silence, not a single clap, not a whisper, not even a breath. For a full 5 seconds, the world seemed to stop. Then it came, a single clap followed by another, and then a wave of applause. The sound grew, louder, deeper, unstoppable. Everyone rose to their feet, cheering, crying, shouting her name, "Maria, Maria!" The room shook with thunderous applause. Maria sat still for a moment, stunned. Her hands still rested on the piano, trembling. Then she looked up. Smiling through tears, she stood and bowed gently. The spotlight caught the tears on her face, making them shine like tiny diamonds. Even Dr. Lewis stood slowly, unable to stay seated. His eyes glistened, and for once there was no pride, only respect. As Maria left the stage, professors rushed to greet her. Students reached out to shake her hands, cameras flashed. But all she could think about was her mother. She whispered softly to herself, "I did it, Mama." Backstage, Professor Daniels hugged her gently. "Maria," he said with a proud smile, You didn't just play music tonight, you gave everyone their humanity back. Maria laughed softly. Wiping her tears, I just played what was inside me. Outside the hall, the audience was still talking, still crying. People who had never noticed her before now called her name with admiration. She's the janitor? One student said, shaking his head. No, she's the heart of this university. But as Maria looked back, last time before leaving the stage, she saw Dr. Lewis standing alone, staring at the piano. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked lost, small, human that night. As she walked home under the streetlights, Maria didn't feel invisible anymore. The laughter that once haunted her had turned into applause that would echo for the rest of her life. She smiled to herself, the cool air brushing against her cheeks. Music never needed permission, she whispered. It just needed someone brave enough to play. The thunder of applause still rang in the hall long after Maria left the stage. People were standing, shouting her name, and wiping their tears, but behind the curtain, Maria stood alone for a moment, breathing heavily, her hands trembling. She looked down at her fingers, the same fingers that once scrubbed floor, now shining under the stage lights, trembling not with fear but with freedom. Professor Daniels approached her with a soft smile. You did it, Maria, he whispered. You made them feel again. She smiled back, tears still glistening in her eyes. I only played what I lost, and what I found again, she said quietly. Outside, the audience still refused to leave. They were chanting her name, calling for an encore. But Maria didn't go back out, she didn't need to. Her heart had already spoken. Meanwhile, in the front row, Dr. Lewis remained seated, his face pale. His pride shattered around him. The board members, faculty, and even students were standing and cheering for the woman he had humiliated. His own words echoed in his head like a curse. If a janitor plays the piano, I'll resign. He had said it to make people laugh, to show his superiority. But now it was everywhere, in the news, on social media, in the whispers of the very people he once ruled over. He felt his throat tighten as the applause continued, a sound not for him but against him. After the concert ended, reporters rushed forward, cameras flashed. Microphones rose. Maria, how did it feel to play again? What do you think of the president's old statement? Did you know he was in the audience tonight? Maria looked overwhelmed, her voice calm but humble. I didn't play to prove anyone wrong, she said softly. I played to remember who I was. Her words spread faster than the video ever did. Headlines popped up within hours. University janitor teaches the world a lesson in humility. President's mockery turns into a promise he can't escape. Maria Alvarez, the musician, who played for every soul that was ever ignored. The next morning, the university was flooded with calls and emails. Donors praised her. Students demanded she be honored, and the media wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to celebrate Maria, everyone except Dr. Lewis. He sat in his office with the curtains drawn, watching the video of her performance again. His own reflection stared back at him from the dark screen. Tired, broken, ashamed, he couldn't hide anymore. Every major outlet was quoting his promise. If a janitor plays that piano, I'll resign, his assistant knocked softly. Sir, the board wants to speak with you, she said. He nodded slowly. Tell them I'll be there. That afternoon, the university's boardroom was silent as Dr. Lewis entered. The members stared at him with cold expressions. Dr. Lewis, the chairman, said, You've brought attention to the school, but not the kind we wanted. He swallowed hard. I never meant to disrespect anyone. Yet you did, another board member said sharply. And now the world sees this university as a place where a janitor's talent shamed its own leader. The room stayed quiet for a moment before the chairman spoke again. Your resignation, please. Dr. Lewis's hands trembled as he slid the paper across the table. For once he didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply nodded. She deserved better, he said quietly. When the news broke, students cheered. He kept his word. One shouted, Justice through music, another laughed. But Maria didn't celebrate. She sat quietly in the cafeteria, sipping her tea, watching the sunlight fall through the window. Professor Daniels joined her, smiling gently. You've changed everything, Maria, he said. The university wants to name a scholarship after you, for students who come from nothing but dream of music. Maria's eyes widened. Me? A scholarship? He nodded. Yes, and they want you to teach part-time in the music department. Maria laughed softly, shaking her head. I don't even have a degree. Daniel smiled. You don't need one when your music already taught the world. Later that evening, Maria walked through the empty concert hall one last time. The piano sat where it always had, glowing under the soft golden light. She ran her fingers across it and whispered. We did it. She sat down and played a gentle tune. Something new this time. Not from the past, but from the present. The melody was lighter, full of peace. It wasn't the song of someone who had lost everything. It was the song of someone who had found herself again. As she played, the echo of her notes drifted into the night, blending with the quiet sounds of the city. The same hall that once mocked her now held her music like a crown. Outside the window, the campus lights flickered like stars, and somewhere far away, Dr. Lewis watched her performance on the news again, whispering softly, You were right. For the first time in years. Maria smiled without pain. She had entered this university as a ghost and unseen, unheard, forgotten. But tonight she left as something far greater, a living melody that no one would ever ignore again. The morning after the gala felt unreal. The sun spilled golden light through the university windows, glimmering across the same halls Maria used to mop every dawn. But today she didn't push her cleaning cart. Today she walked slowly, her steps light, her heart full. Every student, every teacher who passed her smiled or stopped to greet her. Good morning, Professor Maria, one student said with a grin. The title still felt strange to her ears. Professor. She smiled softly. Just Maria is fine. The whole campus buzzed with joy. Her performance had been replayed millions of times online. News stations replayed her story, calling it the most beautiful redemption. Social media filled with clips of her crying at the piano, her hands trembling, her heart on display for the world. That morning she found a letter on her locker, folded neatly. It wasn't fancy or typed, just handwritten on university paper. The words read, You reminded me what greatness truly sounds like. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Maria stood still, her eyes glistening. She hadn't expected him to write. But his words felt honest, regretful and free of pride for the first time. She didn't feel anger toward him, only understanding. People make mistakes, some out of arrogance, some out of ignorance. But music had humbled him the same way life had humbled her. Later that day, Professor Daniels took her to the auditorium once more. The same golden piano gleamed under the spotlight. But this time it wasn't just a piano anymore. On the stage sat a brass plaque engraved with her name, the Maria Alvarez Piano, dedicated to the spirit that reminded us what music means. Her hands trembled as she touched it. You didn't have to, she began. We did, Daniel said firmly. Because you gave us back our heart. The university board awarded her an honorary title, Adjunct Instructor of Piano and Emotional Expression. Her classes filled instantly. Students lined up not just to learn technique, but to learn how to feel music in her first class. Maria stood before them, hands clasped. Music isn't about being perfect, she said softly. It's about being real. Every scar, every tear, every dream. Let it all live in your sound. The students listened in silence, their eyes glowing with admiration. As weeks passed, Maria found joy again in her work. She cleaned sometimes still, not because she had to, but because she loved those quiet moments alone with the piano. She would wipe the dust gently, smiling, whispering, We've come a long way, haven't we? Outside the university, her story continued to inspire. Scholarships were created in her name for underprivileged students with artistic dreams. Parents told their children about her courage, and old musicians who had given up started to play again. One afternoon, Maria received an invitation from a national symphony orchestra. They wanted her to perform her mother's song on television. At first, she laughed. Me? The janitor turned pianist. But Professor Daniels said, No, Maria. The woman who reminded the world that music belongs to everyone. The night of the performance arrived. The lights, the cameras, the full orchestra waiting. But Maria wasn't nervous. She smiled, remembering that cold night years ago when she had first played alone in the dark. The same melody that once cried in silence now filled a stage watched by millions. As the final note echoed, she whispered softly, For you. Mama! And the audience rose again in thunderous applause back at the university. A framed photograph of her sat beside the piano. Maria in her janitor uniform smiling humbly. A quote beneath it read, "You can clean floors and still touch the stars, if you never stop believing in your song." Dr. Lewis visited one last time before moving away. He found her sitting near the piano, her students practicing quietly in the background. "You were right," he said simply. "You didn't need permission to be great," Maria smiled gently, "and you didn't need perfection to learn." As he left, she turned back to the piano, running her hands over the keys. The hall that had once echoed with laughter and mockery now sang only with music and gratitude. That evening, as the sunset painted the sky in soft orange and gold, Maria locked the hall and stepped outside. The air was cool, peaceful. She looked back once more at the building that had witnessed her fall and rise. She whispered softly to herself, "I was never just a janitor. I was always a musician who never stopped waiting for the right note." Then she walked away smiling, her melody lingering behind her, a melody that had once been broken but now would live forever.